What's going on, everybody? I found this pretty odd news story that I'm going to be honest with you, I thought it was completely fake. As I opened up Reuters, I see a headline saying, "Exclusive! Russian troops enter base housing U.S. military in Niger, U.S., official says." Now, as I was looking through open source and looking up some African news, pretty much nobody was reporting on this, but for whatever reason, and I'm not like connected to Reuters, they seem to do a good job about reporting on African news, and they're pretty trustworthy. So as I dug more into this is actually legit. In fact, Lloyd Austin even said there's no imminent threat, everything is okay, but let's sort of dig into this. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you may have known that I've talked about the conflict in Niger, Africa, as far as the downfall of Niger. I'm talking about when the coup all of a sudden took over last year with Mohamed Bazoum, and the French got kicked out of Niger, and I kept predicting and saying the French would get kicked out, because I mean the French pretty much get kicked out of every country they operate in within Africa. Now, as far as the United States, here's pretty much what's happening. I'm just going to simplify it. When the whole coup thing went down, the United States had managed to pretty much waffle up a deal with the junta, and the United States military was able to stay in Niger, Africa. Fast forward to 2024, all of a sudden there are reports of the U.S. military. They really haven't even been doing anything in Niger since the coup. Pretty much the U.S. military was only allowed to sit in their air bases 101 and 201. And these air bases were predominantly used for drone operations, housing operations, and staging operations. So the U.S. military would locate an enemy target within Niger or somewhere in the Sahel, either utilize a drone to go take them out, or either utilize the drone as a reconnaissance assets. Maybe some special forces or regular ground troops would go out and do their mission. Now, I also want to throw this out there. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears has been shed over Niger, Africa. So now all of a sudden for the U.S. military to be getting booted out, we're not using the words getting kicked out. The U.S. military isn't, but let's be very honest here. The U.S. military is simply getting kicked out. They were not able to actually do any of their missions in 101 or 201, the air bases. They were sitting stagnant. They were given permission that, you can defend yourselves, but the U.S. military was not allowed to do the whole, hey, there are some bad guys over there, let us go get them in a defensive strike. That's what the U.S. military does with the Houthis down in Yemen. Niger was not having that. So again, U.S. military, very stagnant. There's no reason to even be there anymore. The operation's done with. So the junta decided, you know what, then you guys should just leave. So as far as the status of the U.S. military, apparently now all of a sudden we get some news, because the media, for whatever reason, just doesn't like to look into what the United States is doing in Africa. In my opinion, it's quite fascinating how the U.S. military has managed to lay so low in Africa, yet there's so much action going on every single day. You sort of have to find it. As far as this operation, why are there Russians in this base? Well, according to sources, they're just there to hang out with the Nigerians. Nobody else knows other than that. All we do know is that Lloyd Austin put out a statement saying that everything is safe. He doesn't see it as a threat. And the number put out there is around 60 Russian troops are in a housing area on the same base as U.S. forces. Now, one thing I want to put out there is this isn't really that shocking or that much hype. Look, the U.S. military is not at war with Russia. They're just not friends. This is like the same thing down in Djibouti, where you have a Chinese base not too far from a U.S. base. We're not friends with one another, but we're also not at war with one another, but we do have some economic trade with one another. It's a very complex thing. And geopolitics in today's day and age is very confusing. But again, I do want to throw out there right now that there are no issues between the Russians and the Americans. In fact, one correlation I do want to put out there is that over in Syria around the 2014 era, Russians and the U.S. were, you might want to say, almost working together to fight the same common enemy, IS, in Syria. So again, it's not really that uncommon or that weird that there are Russians and Americans in the same area. In fact, the U.S. military and the Russian military actually have direct connections and lines to be able to communicate whether a training exercise is happening, whether there is an interception of an aircraft in an area. This is common practice. So I'm sure that everything is super cordial and obviously nothing is going to happen. Now, as far as why would Russia be in Niger, Again, we got to go back a little bit. Everybody remembers Wagner. There was a lot of hype with somebody named Mr. Prigozhin. This guy was like all over social media and stating that he wants to help Niger, he wants to kick the Americans out, and he wants to help with the security of Niger. The way that Russia operates in Africa is rather unique. They don't necessarily do direct money transactions. They go into countries that have really good natural resources. Let me get to that in a second. And what they do is they strike up a deal. For a natural resource, we will protect your country. However, when you look at the direct correlation and how Russia operates in Africa and specific countries like Mali, the countries tend to deteriorate because all Russia cares about are the resources or oil fields or mining areas. They protect those areas, but the rest of the country can kick rocks. You can go look into some charts and some statistics with Mali, Africa. Very devastating stuff and very sad stuff. Now, as far as Russia and Niger, this is obviously extremely symbolic and probably very practical as to what's going to happen. Most likely, the Russian troops are doing some sort of mission to do a reconnaissance on the air base that the U.S. military is obviously going to leave there. That was a gift for Niger. It's not like the U.S. military is just going to knock everything down and head out. No, that's all going to stay there. And I'm sure Russia is just analyzing and looking into the potential of utilizing air bases 101 and I'm sure 201. And so, guys, Russia wants to be in Niger for natural resources. Niger has uranium. And this is one of the biggest reasons why Niger wanted the French kicked out of their country. Is because they were saying, look, France is only using us for our uranium and they're using it for their power plants back home. They could care less about us. We've had an increase of security risks in the last few years and the French have not kept up with their promises in protecting our country. Now, again, I know this is a little bit of speculation, but this is also very consistent in how Russia operates in Africa, whether in Sudan, whether in Mali, whatever country they're operating in. Now, the different part about this story is the fact that this is actual Russian troops. This is not Wagner. Typically, whenever Russia operates within Africa, they utilize their Wagner groups. Wagner is a very, very important asset to the Russian military as far as being ambassadors for Russia. Again, a little confusing, but they utilize Wagner. Russia utilizes Wagner as, hey, we will protect your country. These are specialized troops, and we'll even hire and train some of your troops to work with Wagner. And then from there, we facilitate deals. Wagner gets a transaction of cash. Russia gets a transaction of natural resources. Now, right now, things are sort of lining up to where it makes sense for Russia to be in Niger because they'll get uranium. If there's one country that Russia is heavily tied to right now, it's the country of Iran. Iran needs uranium, and everyone is watching Iran right now because of their nuclear project is getting closer and closer every day to enriched uranium. So again, this would only be a massive W for Russia and another country that the United States gets kicked out of in Africa. So as far as where will the U.S. go next, I've been seeing some reports of maybe the Coast of Ivory, but the U.S. has to stay within ECOWAS, which is the region of Africa and the western part of Africa, or they have to stay within the Sahel region, which is the belt of where all the enemies of the United States are located within Africa. But again, this is definitely a very weird move for Russia to all of a sudden walk in, but it goes to show that Niger is very serious in working with their Russian counterparts. They're seeing other Russian countries getting like money and food from Russia because if you guys are unaware, Putin has been bragging about feeding African nations and working with African nations, helping to develop African nations. China is doing the same thing, but this is the first time we're actually seeing Russian and U.S. troops within hundreds of feet away on a same base in Africa, not in a standoff, but definitely a very symbolic, hey, we'll see you guys later. Thank you for building this base. $300 million worth of a base, probably just going to be handed over to the Russians because Niger, they need help. Unfortunately, they're unable to protect and work within their own country, and they've admitted this. And, you know, Russia has always been there since the start and said, we will help you, we will help you. And it looks like this is probably going to be the next move. So we'll see what happens. Africa always fascinates me. The people of Africa, they get taken advantage of. And this is another instance where most likely Niger will probably get taken advantage of by the Russians.